Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's about 3 o'clock on a Thursday. I say about, we're a couple minutes late. We had a bit of a technical difficulty. Hope everybody's good out there. Very excited this afternoon. As lucky as I am to get to work with really incredible agave brands in obviously Mezcal Vago and Tequila Ocho. I don't get to talk about Sotol very often, which is kind of the third leg of that agave and agave adjacent stool, so to speak. And something, having worked in Texas for several years, was very commonly talked about, not really well known. That was just starting to get to change a little bit when I moved from Texas to Mexico, and that was largely through the really hard work and dedication of a good friend of mine, Ricardo Pico, who I'm lucky enough to have on the show this afternoon. Ricardo, how are you doing over there, buddy?
Hello, Francisco. Good to see you, my friend. Doing good, doing good. Working here, keeping busy here in Chihuahua. We're about to end the production season this year for Sotol. So we're
That's that's great, man. So when does your season usually run? I didn't realize that it was running through all the way through September.
usually it begins when we have the first cold, the first freezing temperatures in the sierras. So that's when Sotol concentrates all of its sugars. So mainly this is in late October when we start, and then it goes all throughout the year until it starts raining. This season specifically has been very dry, so we haven't got much rain. So that's why we're still working a little bit.
Okay, I guess maybe that's why I was surprised. I figured you guys would have already gotten some rain in through there. So it's just strictly because this year is a little bit drier than normal. Is that kind of a trend? And we can get into this a little bit later. But is that kind of a trend that you guys have been noticing a little bit, or is this year just kind of an abnormality, or what's going on with that?
It's very it varies a little bit. I mean, last year we stopped producing around mid July. 2 years ago we stopped early July. So it all depends, and also depends on what area specifically we're working on. So, for instance, we're going to talk a little bit about this further down the road. But basically, we have the northeastern part, which is the desert, which usually has later rains than the forest region. So, in the forest, most of the year, we work throughout the year. So, because we can use agave plants that grow nearby to the sotol. But specific, like the desert, which is a specific sotol producing area, we have to stop at some point when rains are a little more abundant.
Okay,
But we're also based on yield on our fermentation.
got it, got it. So I didn't realize that. I didn't really think about that. I know that you guys have. I know that you guys have. I know that you guys are usual, not usually, but in part of your production practices, sometimes you guys are using agave or blending agave with sotol, which we can talk about in a little bit. But I didn't really think about the fact that does change and give you. I guess it sounds like it gives you a little bit of a wider production season than you would otherwise if you were just relying on the sotol. Is what it sounds like.
Correct.
Oh wow,
Correct.
that's really cool.
So yeah, I mean, and the thing is also we have to picture that Chihuahua is the biggest state in Mexico. So we have several microclimates and very different terroirs. So the north western part of the state has sotol and some agave varietals. Then in the middle of the state, in the south western part of the state, we
Mhm.
have other agave species that are used for producing lechuguilla. So lechuguilla would be the name of a spirit that comes from the southwestern Chihuahua region, and also bordering with Sonora, with the south and northeastern part of Sonora, our neighboring state, which is better known for Bacanora, but Lechuguilla used to be sort of the moonshine. It's kind of an obscure spirit of agave spirits that are made from plants that are not the agave angustifolia, which is mainly used for Bacanora. So we have around 3 different species. We have agave shrivii, we have agave bobicornuta, agave polyantiflora, among others that they collect and use for lechuguillas.
So that's what I was going to ask you. So you guys, so obviously there are agave which are commonly known as lechuguilla, but what you guys are using is not that variety of agave, right? That's just what you guys are calling the spirit, right? You're calling it, right? Instead of raicilla, for example, as you would in Jalisco, you guys produce an agave spirit that's called or bacanora. You guys produce an agave spirit called lechuguilla.
Correct. And often there's a lot of confusion because there's an agave called agave lechuguilla that's its the taxonomic name. But this agave lechuguilla is mainly from the desert, and it doesn't really yield any juice for fermentation and distillation. So sometimes people think that we're using that desert specific varietal, but it's just the regional name that we gave to the spirit, lechuguilla, not the name of the agave.
So you guys are producing kind of in the northeast and the northwestern part of Chihuahua, right? But the where you guys are producing, because being from Arizona, I'm close to, I associate Bacanora, which is very much in the northwestern part of Sonora, across on the other side of the state, right? Or I guess a little more central. But where you guys are producing in the northwestern part of Chihuahua, they're on the border with Sonora. Does it spill over into Sonora, or is it still pretty much located within the state of Chihuahua?
It spills over. I've explored a little bit of Sonora, but and I've tried amazing lechuguillas from there. But it's very interesting because even it spills over both ways. So, for instance, one of the producers we work with, Lupe Lopez, he is very close to that border, and sometimes he finds mature angustifolia agaves that he uses for producing spirits, which would technically be a Chihuahuan Bacanora, but since we don't have the denomination of origin for Bacanora, we just call it angustifolia.
So let's backtrack a little bit, because I already feel us getting into some of the more kind of geeky specifics, differentiation and stuff like that, where exactly in Chihuahua it's made, etc. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because, since we run this through the Samson and Surrey TV channel, a lot of times we catch people who are more whiskey focused or things like that. So for those of the people who are not super familiar with Sotol, who might think it's a type of mezcal or algo así, when you're giving a presentation, kind of a very broad presentation, how do you explain Sotol to people who are not familiar with it whatsoever? Kind of your 2-minute explanation of what Sotol is at its most basic form.
Okay, so Sotol is a spirit that has a denomination of origin for the states of Chihuahua, Coahuila, and Durango, and it's made from a base plant that is taxonomically known as the Dacilirium. So the Dacilirium has 16 species, and 5 subvarietals of the Dacilirium that are spread throughout the south of the U.S., the southwest of the U.S., all the way through central part of Mexico, down until Oaxaca, pretty much. So this is a fibrous plant with fibrous leaves, thin spiky leaves that are fibers instead of the succulent leaves of the agave. It looks a little bit more like a bush in that sense. All these leaves end at the base in the shape of a spoon, which is where all these sugars are contained in the fibers of the base of the plant. So basically what differentiates Sotol from agave is that they come from the same family, which is the Asparagaceae family, but it later on subdivides into Agavaceae, which are all the agaves we know, and Nolinaceae, which is where the Dasylirion comes from. So if we think of the plant as, let's think of it as an onion, where we have several layers that we peel, and every single layer inside has all these fibers with sugars. That it seems similar in some sort of way as the fibers that we have in sugar cane. It's very, very fibrous, very dry. So we cook this plant, of course, to obtain or turn all these starches into sugars by cooking underground from 3 to 4 days. Then we mill, mainly we mill with an axe, just shredding, trying to get all these fibers contained in between the layers of the heart of the plant. And we leave them in underground wooden vats. Let them sit there for a couple of days, add the water, let it sit and ferment. Kind of, we're making a juice, let's say, or an infusion of Sotol fibers in water. Let it sit, ferment for 5-7 days, depending on the weather, depending on the region. If it's too hot, maybe it'll be shorter fermentations. If it's colder, then we'll have longer fermentations, which is the case for northwest of Chihuahua.
Okay.
And, then we take the bagazo, all the fibers and the juice, and place it on copper pot stills that are buried underground. We use firewood to evaporate. Then we have a wooden top that collects all the vapor. And then we it's connected to the serpentine that it's submerged in cold water, where it collects and comes out as concentrated distilled spirit from Sotol. So the first distillation, we call it vino. Second distillation, it's what we call Sotol. And basically the maestros adjust the ABV according to their style and what they're looking for. So some of them might use, very few use distilled water to adjust. Most of them use heads and tails and just try to aim for what they call parejo, even, which is around 50 ABV. That by measuring when the Sotol is coming out, they use cow horns and pass from one cow horn to the other and measure the pearl of the Sotol. So by seeing the pearl, they aim for medium range pearl that will open from the middle of the horn, and they know it's parejo or even at 50 ABV. That's mostly the process of Sotol producing.
So parejo is like como se dice, like cordón, right? So where it's like the pearl size and everything, it's at the right ABV for where you guys want it to be.
Correct.
Awesome. So for those of you guys who are not super familiar, that's basically the process for producing mezcal, essentially, right? Depending on where you are and what part of Mexico you're in. So it's really easy to see why it's really considered part of that agave spirits family. Although you always have to put that, it's easier to explain it as part of that family. Although technically the plants are not part of the agave family. Historically, they were at one point classified as such, but then they got reclassified as their own separate family, which also leads to a lot of the confusion. And then you also have the fact that, in a lot of these regions, but in Chihuahua, for example, like Ricardo was just saying, you have people who are producing both spirits, right? They're producing a lechuguilla or an agave or true agave spirit, and they're also producing sotol. And Ricardo, if I'm not mistaken, you guys have also done some bottlings where you're actually doing ensembles or blends that are a blend of sotol raw material fermented together with agave in the same batch. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, and that's mainly because in the Northwest, for instance, Bienvenido Fernandez was the first producer that we met that uses that practice.
Uh-huh.
And it is mainly because when, let's say, the harvester it's out on the field. We're talking about the Sierra, the high Sierra. He's up in the mountains, and with Sotol has a couple differences to agave in the sense that Sotol can bloom or shoot its stalk for reproduction several times in its lifespan. So agave shoots its stalk, and then we know it's mature and ready to be harvested. Right. So when Cruz, the harvester, is out on the field, he knows which Sotol plants are ready by size and color, pretty much. But then he finds some capon agaves, some agaves that don't have the stalk anymore, which pretty much says it's mature and ready to use. So he collects those along with the sotoles that he's harvesting for the whichever batch they're producing. So of course, if they don't use those agaves that are ready, they'll rot and they won't be able to use them anymore. So that's why that blend comes kind of automatically, because the materials are ready. They work with whatever is ready to use.
Got it. So you keep referencing how it's colder in the Northwest, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty good with my Mexico geography, so please feel free to correct me. But there's two main mountain ranges that run through Mexico, right? The Sierra Madre Occidental and the Sierra Madre Oriental, right? And the Oriental kind of runs along the Gulf Coast, essentially, through Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, down into like San Luis Potosí. And then the Sierra Madre Occidental runs along the western part, right? And the mountains run right along that border between Sonora and Chihuahua that we were talking about, right? Is that kind of how the geography works? So that's why you get so much of a colder temperature in the northwestern part and the western part of Chihuahua, right? But then it's completely different, right? Because I'm familiar with the Sonoran Desert, but along the borderlands, you also have the Chihuahuan Desert as you get into El Paso and cruising basically down the I-10 highway into central Texas. And that's like the very northern end of the Chihuahua Desert, right? Which is a very, very different climate and kind of its own little pocket right there in north central Mexico, right?
Correct.
So how far down does the Chihuahuan Desert go into Mexico?
Well, actually, it's pretty much a big part of the South U.S., Texas, Arizona, then Chihuahua, and it goes further down until Coahuila.
Okay.
Coahuila, it's also a big part of the Chihuahuan Desert, and Coahuila is also a state that is part of the denomination of origin for Sotol as well.
Right, and then so that kind of leads to my next question, which is the third state in that is Durango, which I see you have the Lágrimas hat on right now. Speaking of Durango, a shout out to Herman. So, does the Chihuahuan Desert does that extend into the northern part of Durango as well, or is it not part of the desert? But you said Sotol goes all the way down. I've seen it in Oaxaca as well. So is that just because the plant grows in Durango, or is Durango also part of the Chihuahuan Desert?
Just a small fraction of Durango, but
Yeah.
I mean, it is also part of the denomination because that specific part, which is where Chihuahua, Coahuila, and Durango border, um, where the three states meet, is mainly where Sotol production has been focused.
Okay, so that kind of that's where I want to touch on. I'm glad we're kind of talking about those three states because I want to ask about the denomination of origin, right? So you mentioned that the Sotol grows, all the way basically from the U.S. Mexico border and a little bit north of there, all the way down to essentially north and north central Oaxaca. I mean, I've been driving down to Sola de Vega to visit Tio Rey, and if you drive on there's two main road options, the main highway, and there's one the next canyon over. And there's some producers who are producing Sotol in that area. So obviously the plant grows down into Oaxaca. Why is it that those three states were the only three that were included in the denomination of origin?
I think the denomination was pretty much shaped on around the spirit and the name of the spirit. I mean, like Sotol was well known here in Chihuahua, as I was mentioning, those specific areas of Coahuila and Durango. Sotol was being made also. But I think it's a matter of where the activity was more intense. I mean, like some specific parts of Chihuahua, like Ciudad Madera, Coyame, and neighboring areas in the northeastern part of Chihuahua, were some of the biggest producers. Then we have also the area around Jimenez, which is south. It's down south, very near to Durango and Coahuila. Then we have Cuencamé, we have Torrecillas. We have spots where the activity was stronger, and where abandoned vinatas. We have traces and all these stories of Sotol production in those areas. It even goes down further to Zacatecas, which is just below Durango. And I think every spirit has its story, and it has its, I think Adio, it's a combination of elements that are, we have terroir, we have cultural aspects, the same, for instance, the same tribes that were part of the South U.S., Northern Mexico, were the same ones that used to collect these plants, Sotol and Agave, together and cook them underground. I mean, there's traces, archaeological traces in Paquimé, in Casas Grandes, which is the prairie in northwestern Chihuahua, where they have proof of that they used to cook those plants and feed on them, maybe ferment them and use them for their ceremonies, and those variables, terroir, the culture, tradition, and the people that used to make Sotol first as a fermented beverage, maybe as a spirit, we don't know. But at some point started distilling. It's part of the same northern culture. And I think those are the shared elements surrounding the Sotol Dio. Then, pretty much as we talk about Lechuguilla, an agave spirit made in northern Mexico, Chihuahuan, Sonora mainly. I feel the same way about Cucharillo, for instance, down in southern Mexico, in Oaxaca more specifically, right?
Yep.
So they embraced the plant in their own way. They gave it a name as a regional spirit. So I think that's the beauty of Mexican spirits. I mean, even when you're using the same raw material, you might just call it whatever whatever your culture, your tradition, your people decides to call them, right? And it's something very common with agaves as well. I mean, agave lechuguilla here has a taxonomic name. We call it lechuguilla as a plant. Then maybe in the Bajío region in Jalisco, they have an agave that the common name is lechuguilla, but the taxonomic name might be something else. I don't know if I explained myself well.
No, yeah, I think you definitely did. For those that didn't catch on one little note, I just want to clarify a little bit. I had talked about producing Sotol in Oaxaca, and he had mentioned Cucharilla, which is what they call the Sotol and the plant that is coming out of that area, if anybody didn't put those two things together. But yeah, I mean, that's something that I try and talk a lot about in a lot of my kind of more culturally broad focused discussions about mezcal is, I tell people to try not to get frustrated and not to be intimidated when they're first getting into it, because you're going to get confused, because there's a lot of crossover between taxonomic names, common names, right? Whether we're talking about Quiche, for example, in Mexicano down in like Minas and that area versus what we call it in Yegolé, etc. So there's a lot of common usage of the same word for different plants, or the same plant being called by different names. And I think that really goes to show what you're speaking about the cultural differences in these DOs, particularly when you have DOs that cover a very large geographic region in comparison to smaller, more focused geographic protection areas that people might be more associated with through the wine industry in Europe, et cetera, where I think the geographic areas are a lot smaller and therefore a little bit more culturally homogeneous, whereas we're talking about things that, we just talked about things that are from the southern parts of Texas, not even contained by Mexico, down into Oaxaca, right? So there's no way you're going to be able to tell a comprehensive and a cohesive cultural story, because it just doesn't exist when you're talking about an area that is that big, even within the state of Chihuahua, right? So that is one of the things I kind of want to expand on a little bit. The DO for Sotol being, already big, but still only covering those three states, Durango, Coahuila, and Chihuahua, all of which are concentrated in a pretty small area. Do you see the DO, or is there anybody talking about or arguing for the expansion of the DO, the way that you see the mezcal DO constantly changing, evolving, growing, contracting, as we saw a year before last, where they added a few states and then rescinded that, and now it's still only at 9? Do you see that happening, or are people pretty happy with the DO only covering those 3 states right now?
I think right now I don't see a lot of push for growing the DO. Mm-hmm. I think at some point, eventually more participants are gonna join the industry. I mean, that's inevitable because it's a growing category.
Yep.
So maybe, I mean, whenever it grows, we'll start seeing more states becoming involved or trying to get on board with the deal. But as I see it right now, I mean, there's not many producers. Even, I mean, like if we go to Durango, we'll find maybe 5 or 6 active producers. Coahuila, 2 or 3 maybe. Mm-hmm. So right now, I think it's very slow. I mean, Chihuahua, you see it very active. I mean, like I see a lot of brands being established, yep, which is great. I mean, build more awareness and bring more diversity to the industry. But I think also that we have to first focus on doing something authentic, right? I mean, like rescuing whatever is left of those industries and be always inspired by it. I mean, I see, for instance, a lot of opportunity for a state like Zacatecas, which has some history of distilling, but also because they have you have all these tequila producers in Zacatecas, you have all these mezcal producers in Zacatecas, and maybe, I mean, I think the key factor is the population of plants that you have in the state, because we have to remember Sotol is being made so far of wild harvested plants. So a lot depends on if we think of expanding the DO. Well, first we have to have good reasons for it, which would be, okay, well, was there a production tradition in the town? Is there something that we can really rescue? I mean, different methods or some specific methods of production which aim more to rescue the culture and tradition more than just being a business plan that seems feasible for a region and creating jobs, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that doesn't by itself qualify you to start being part of or to be part of a denomination of origin. So I think we have to be very careful on that.
Okay, well, that's great to hear, actually, because it's a lot of times I don't, I don't want to say I don't hear it, because I definitely do hear it, but I guess I wasn't sure kind of where you lied, and I'm not, there's not that many people that I know that are really ingrained in the Sotol category the way that you are with how closely you're tied to it. So you do think that it's, maybe not necessarily an absolute rule, but it is maybe a little bit better if there's a cultural history in a place before you extend it to include that area.
Correct. And I think, I mean, as we talk about denominations of origin, we talk about sharing aspects that that give you certain standard. I mean, and in not in the technical or chemical way of seeing it, but mainly, okay, so that's why I'm a big fan of geographic indicators, because if I'm telling you, even with Sotol, I would tell you that flavor profiles and maybe even the culture is very different from the northwestern part to the northeastern part of the state.
Yeah.
Why? Because you have completely different surroundings. I mean, like in the desert, you have ocotillos. You don't have a lot of trees. You have ocotillo, mesquite. You have desert plants mainly. Very, very rough terrain, very dry, very arid. And then on the northwest, we have a lot of trees. We have oak, we have pine, we have a lot of moss, we have a lot of humidity. So the setting is very, very different, and the terroir elements that will give the complexity and the nature to it will be, completely contrasting. So, and even here in Chihuahua, when they are making Sotol in the northwestern part, they call it cereque. They call the plant cereque, and they call the distilled spirit cereque. So even the language is a little different. So I think geographic indicators are great to clarify. I mean, if we're talking about Sotol, well, then maybe forest Sotol, or maybe madera Sotol, or as we go from town to town, we we can better explain what we will be expecting to taste. So I think as that's as far as a DO goes. I mean, like whenever we have, if we are thinking of maybe of a Venn diagram, whatever included that shares those qualities, I think we're able to make it part of a DO. If it's not, well, then it's not. I mean, it's something different, and maybe we should, instead of being frustrated that it's not a part of the DO, maybe we should be proud and highlight those specific differences that make this even more unique, you know?
I'm really glad that you touched on that, man. And I do want to get back to it because for me, one of my favorite things to talk about is kind of the difficulty, not because it's polarizing or it's controversial, but I just find it fascinating is how do we classify these spirits that are so culturally tied and so culturally relevant, right, in a place that is so culturally diverse and geographic indicators that cover such large areas, right? But I do want to transition just a little bit for a few minutes and kind of get into some of the geeky aspects, not necessarily geeky because people, that word I think is a little bit overused, but some of the more specific kind of detailed production points of Sotol. And that's, we have some questions that are coming in off of Facebook. So a couple of them, first off, how does the size of a Sotol piña compare to an Espadín piña? Is a question from Amy Puig on Facebook.
Oh, it's fairly small. We're talking about 8 kilograms average on mature plants that have grown 15 to 18 years. So we're talking about very fairly small plants. The range will be from 8 up until the biggest plants I've seen, maybe 35, 40 kilograms. But we're talking, I mean, 1 in 20 plants or 1 in 30 plants that we're using on a batch.
So the age range is a little bit longer than you would see for Espadín as well, for before the plants are mature.
Because also because we're talking about wild harvested plants. So the desert region with less rains, less nutrients for the plant will take even longer. So we're talking maybe 15 to 18 years in the desert and maybe 12 to 15 years in the forest where we get more water, more rain. But currently there have been experimental fields for where Sotol is being cultivated.
Oh, cool.
We're down to 8 to 10 years to have fully mature Sotols to be used for fermentation. So that's something we have to envision pretty much. I mean, like we were talking about expanding DOs. Well, I think the best way to expand a DO is maybe by start planting, you know. I think that's a very, very important task to tackle first if we want to be in this industry. So it starts right from the seed because Sotol, unlike Agave, it doesn't yield springs. So we have male and female plants in Sotol. So the male plant has the flower and the female plant has the seed. So we have to collect those seeds, grow from seed, then grow the plant for a couple of years so it will be able to develop its teeth and be able to defend itself. Because even more in the desert region, anything that's green, it's food. So if we put it there, right in the middle of the desert, for sure, deer, rodent, I mean like rabbits, jackrabbits, will feed on the plant if it's not able to defend itself.
So one of the questions that I want to ask as well, kind of about the similarities or differences. So really quickly, you mentioned that the Sotol plant doesn't produce clones, right? No hijuelos with Sotol.
Correct.
But at the same time, you can reharvest a plant in its life cycle, right? After you harvest it, it grows back. You harvest it again.
There's some range of regrowth,
Yeah.
but it takes very long. I mean, like we've seen when you the thing is when you harvest a sotol plant, you don't harvest it from the root, so the
Right.
root remains untouched. So I mean, like if you're out on the field and you go back to a field that you were harvesting 3 or 4 years, you'll see a small plant just regrowing from the same root. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, but uh, but I mean, we can't actually rely on that as a sustainable practice. I mean, like it does regrow, takes longer. So
Yeah.
I think the way to go is to just start the nurseries, then semi-cultivated, then maybe cultivated. I think that those are the steps to follow in the near future.
Do you obviously it takes a long time to regrow, not be as you said, you would never rely on that as your main production model to use the same plants over and over. But I'm just curious, do you see a decrease in yield or a decrease in quality if you've already harvested that plant once before? Have you guys paid attention to that? I'm really just kind of curious if there's any change in the plant after if you use it more than once.
To be honest with you, I mean, we're not that far. I mean, like,
But I just wanted to ask.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like, I think it's an interesting question. But I mean, the plant being grown in the wild, I think. I mean, it'll take us maybe, I don't know, 8 more years to find to find those. But I think it's an interesting question.
We have another question, a couple more from Facebook. What type of wood is used in distillation?
It depends on the region. So, for instance, in the forest, we have plenty of oak.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, the main subject here is to use firewood be that will last long,
Yeah,
that will be compact enough to last long. So in the forest, we use mainly oak. In the desert, we use dry mesquite wood mainly.
got it. Um, is there anybody doing clay pot distillation of Sotol? I know that I've talked to you before about like a ceramics tradition that is in Chihuahua that I'm a big fan of, but that's all more decorative, not functional ceramics. But is there any use of clay rather in distillation?
As far as I know, and as far as I've explored, I mean, it's been a little frustrating because I've been looking for it, but I haven't found it yet. I mean, but leads mainly take us to a lechuguilla, clay pot distilled lechuguilla rather than sotol, clay pot distilled sotol. But so far, I would be lying if I told you that someone's doing it. I mean, it would be cool to do it just for sake of it and see how it tastes.
Yeah,
But what I've heard, it's in the Sierra there might be someone just doing agave-based spirits in clay pots. We'll keep looking, and you'll be the first one to know, my friend.
keep my ears perked up for that, man. And then Amy Puig is also asking, is there a history at all of pechuga production? Obviously, pechuga is very popular amongst mezcal and sotol geeks. So is there a history at all of producing them? And if there isn't a history, is there anybody experimenting with doing a pechuga style or an animal protein style?
Correct. So when we first heard about some sort of pechuga process of using proteins on the second distillation was first through producer Chito Fernandez from Ciudad Madera. he mentioned once that they used to put a beef inside of the still, or hanging from the wooden top, along with anise and orange, and they used to call that carne. So 5 years ago, we did a small batch with him. I mean, it ended up being bigger than we expected, around 80 liters. Because, I mean, if we think in terms of Sotol, 120, 150 liters is a lot. I mean, like, we are very used to very small batches, which range, I would say, averaging between 70, 80 liters per batch. So we did an 80-liter batch with beef, anise, and orange, and it turned out great. Apparently, they don't do it that often because your yield goes a little bit lower. All of the vapor that's being absorbed by the meat.
Yep.
So basically, if you would get a yield of 140 liters, you're only getting 80 if you're using meat, plus the cost of the meat. So that's why it used to be something a little more celebratory, or something that they would only make for special occasions. Yep. So since then, we've been doing a batch every different year. 2015 we did beef. Then 2016 we went to Don Eduardo Arrieta, who we know as the master of the desert, one of the wisest Sotol producers in the state. And we did a goat meat Sotol in this desert region. Then next year we did a venison one in Madera, in the forest again, with Bienvenido Fernandez. And we've been just trying to recollect and recreate the story of this spirit, because this was a long gone tradition that, I mean, for instance, Don Eduardo, it was his first time making a carne, or like the goat meat Sotol. And he recreated it from what he saw from his grandfather and his father, who used to make that spirit. Alongside the carnes or the pechuga style spirits, we also have a lot of infusions in the desert region. For instance, they use damiana, and we have to remember the history of, or the background of these spirits was not only for imbibing and getting high or getting, like the booze, yeah. But they were also remedies that were being used in the different towns. So, for instance, if you have this, the older generations would have this custom of drinking a little bit of Sotol, maybe just an ounce of Sotol every day, just to keep colds away and just to keep be healthy. But also, if they wanted to they wanted to get their spouse pregnant, then they would put a little bit of the damiana, stuff like that. These have been long known as remedies. In the forest region, then we have the curados, which have cinnamon, raisins, pecans, all these different recipes that ale different all these different health situations,
Yeah, that's one of the things. I'm glad that you mentioned the carne de res, the red meat, and the goat, because that's always, just me personally, just being a pain in the butt. That's one of my kind of idiosyncratic things that I always, kind of explain to people, is like, it's a little bit of a misnomer, I think, to call them pechuga style, right? Because in the north, like you said, and that's one of my favorite things that we're talking about, is because it shows the cultural the cultural differences, a little bit of the history of the borderlands, because, you know, growing up, you know, I saw so much red meat in the Mexican food that my family cooked, that was served in restaurants, etc. And that's just because there's such a history of cattle ranching in the northern borderlands, where, you know, obviously it makes sense to use red meat, which, you know, cows don't have pechuga, right? Like their pechuga is a poultry breast. So it's a little bit confusing, but I get it. People have to think of some weird, you know, an easy way to classify something. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that's one of the cool differences that you see between the north, the frontera, the borderlands, and southern, more interior Mexico, is the difference in the proteins that make up the main staples of the diet there, right? Not necessarily the main staples, but the main protein sources, where you have beef so readily available in Durango, in Chihuahua, in Sonora, these wide open areas where there was a lot more grazing room. Therefore, you could have cattle, and that's what made sense to be the main protein source. So, Ricardo, we only have a few more minutes here. I wanted to ask you a little bit, kind of, what are a couple of the main differences that you see in, just to give people kind of a shot at the diversity that exists in Sotol? What are some of the differences in flavor, styles, profiles that you see in the mountains versus the more desert climates?
Well, I would begin maybe. Sotol is best known as a desert spirit. So first, when we, at least here in the north, when we think of Sotol, we're thinking maybe a little bit more about the desert expression.
Yeah.
Which is very dry, chalky. We have the terroir elements that surround are very grassy, very herbal. We have even some hints of mint, cacao, leather. It's very, very rustic, very decadent on the flavor profile. That's mainly for the desert region Sotoles. Then, on the other hand, in the forest, we have a little bit more of a fresher profile, with, I would say, menthol, eucalyptus, moss, mushrooms, all this very it's a little more I would say, I mean, it's fresher. It's like just rain in the forest. I mean, just like all those fresh elements, it transports you, really. So I would say Sotol is very representative of the terroir elements that surround it. I mean, like, if it's the desert, you have all those chalkiness, all that minerality, the dry earth, and it's also the water source that we're using for the fermentation that we're using if we're adjusting. So it rounds very well the finished beverage. So for instance, when we're talking about some Sotol from that forest region, we have that it's very round, all that freshness, all those very strong flavors,
yeah,
will come through. It's but I think, and as I've tried cucharillos, for instance, from Oaxaca,
yeah.
I think it's very, very different. Also, so Sotol will be it's a very transparent plant. It gives you whatever you feed it. I mean, like, whichever plants that surround the Sotol will absorb that personality, all those layers of flavors, plus added to rain seasons, added to added to that all those layers of the terroir, it will express itself and just bring them to you. And if we add then the craftsmanship of the maker, the heart it puts into it, how he mills, how he ferments, all those all that knowledge that they're using to produce, then it gives you, I mean, those variables will give you unique and very unique and unrepeatable amounts of spirits. I mean, using those variables, I mean, terroir, plant, hand of the maker, and that's the beauty of it. I mean, that's why we keep our batches small, because we want them to actually represent all the effort of the maestro, all the effort of all the characters involved in the process. Because sometimes we have even very crazy ensembles. For instance, Lupe Lopez in the forest region, he does 3 Dacilirium Willery, Agave Shribii, and Agave Angustifolia ensemble. So it's an agave, 2 agave, 1 Sotol ensemble that gives you completely different layers, and it really blows your mind. So I think as far as we keep that authenticity, that tradition, and we have responsible use of raw materials, I mean, this will be going and going. I mean, like, I think, but it's something we need to treasure and to preserve. Because, I mean, if we grow and we don't care about raw materials, we don't care about traditions and customs, we'll lose this specific identity of Northern spirits. I mean, there's so many cool things going on. I mean, like, we have people distilling palmilla, for instance, which is another sotol technically, or dacilirium being used for making alcoholic beverages. And I mean, maybe they don't even want to be part of the DO, and that's totally cool because they have a name for it. Just as we in Lechuguilla, maybe we don't want to be a mezcal, but it is what it is. It is a beverage that has its regional name, that it's being produced by generations and generations, and we get to enjoy it, you know?
Well, Ricardo, I think you said it wonderfully, man. I think I was worried about running right up against the end of our time, but I think you actually kind of sent us off on some really wonderful notes. And hearing you talk about it, man, you're so well spoken about it and poetic about it, you know, just you have such a romanticism about it that, I mean, I feel like I'm talking to David Surrey, man, to be honest with you, but for Sotol, man. You're a really wonderful ambassador for the category. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And it's always a pleasure to see you. You have definitely earned your reputation as one of the nicest people in the agave spirits category, man. So thank you so much for taking some time out. Everybody keep an eye out on Ricardo. I know he's working on several different projects, as he always is. So thanks again, brother, and please take care of yourself.
Thank you, Francisco. And I mean, anytime, you're more than welcome here. Come down to visit, and that goes for everyone. I mean, come here, visit, support these beautiful people that's making history, recreating this spirits, wonderful producers. And we have a lot to do here in Chihuahua. We have a beautiful Sierra. We have some beautiful spirits. You guys have a home here.
That's wonderful. Well, take care of yourself, brother, and hopefully I will see you sooner rather than later, man.
Perfect. Great talking to you, my friend.
Hey, bro. Take care.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks.